All right, welcome back to Brighter Rays. Today we're looking at Colossians 4, 10 through 17. Looking at this final section here of the book of Colossians. So today we're looking at some final greetings and messages, Paul's final greeting, and some messages he has about some other people. And so let's get into it. So let's start with Aristarchus. Paul calls this man a fellow prisoner, and in Philemon 1:24, he's called a fellow worker. Aristarchus was from Macedonia, from the city of Thessalonica. It's probably unlikely that he was also a real prisoner together with Paul, but had probably voluntarily decided to stay with Paul in his imprisonment to help and encourage him. So Aristarchus sent his greetings to the church as well. So this man probably was just voluntarily stayed with Paul in his imprisonment, which would have encouraged him, helped him. You know, he's probably chained to Roman soldiers, so he's going to need some help getting his basic needs met. He needs someone there to help him. So Aristarchus was that man, a fellow worker in the Lord, but also became a fellow prisoner. Then there's Mark is mentioned here. So he's called the cousin of Barnabas, probably because everyone knew Barnabas, and his work. And Mark is lesser known, so in order to say, hey, this Mark that we're talking about, Mark, it's Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. Oh, yeah, I know Barnabas. Everyone knew Barnabas, probably. But who's Mark? He's the younger cousin of Barnabas. So this is the Mark who wrote the gospel and who was a young man when Jesus was on the earth. In Acts 15, we have the account of the disagreement between Barnabas and Paul over Mark because of Mark's premature leaving in the earlier missionary journey. So remember the story that Mark took off. He did not finish the journey. He left. So Barnabas wanted to take, on the next journey, Barnabas wanted to take Mark, and Paul said no, didn't think he should go. So they decided to split ways. Barnabas would take Mark, and then Paul and Silas would go off and do their thing. So that's how it worked out. However, by this time, Mark had matured and become a trusted fellow worker and friend to Paul. So Paul really loved Mark. So there was nothing there. That's a good example of not allowing past problems to cloud present working together. Might have had troubles in the past, but bygones are bygones, and let's work together. Let's get things done. And he becomes a friend, and they become close friends, it seems. So now the church had been sent instructions on what to do for Mark when he arrived at their church, especially, as he points out, to welcome him. So Mark's story is one of usefulness, forgiveness, and trust after failure. So the story might have traveled around that Mark was not trustworthy, but here Paul puts that all to rest and says, hey, welcome him. He is, a trusted friend, and he's a fellow worker, so trust him. Welcome him into your church when he comes. Next is a man called Jesus, called Justus. He probably took on, people had lots of different names, but nothing's really known about this man. Jesus was his Hebrew name, and Justus is a Roman name, so he probably, that's how people usually did. Many people had multiple names as they were named by their parents according to their ethnic tradition. So this is a Jewish man whose name was Savior, who was Jesus. And then many people then also had a Roman name that they would use in that society. So it's kind of like Paul. Saul is a Hebrew name, and Paulus or Paul is a Roman name. So, people say, well, he changed names when he was converted. I don't know if that's the case. Doesn't need to be the case. I mean, he could have gone by Saul when he was around his Hebrew friends, when he would go to the synagogues to try to preach. I'm guaranteed he's probably using Saul. And then when he was doing his normal work, when he was out amongst the Gentiles, he probably used his Roman name, Paulus. And that makes sense, So we do know that Justus here, Mark, and Aristarchus were the only Jews that were his fellow workers with him where he was at. And so when he's writing, he said, these are the only Jews that were with me. Remember, at this time, as the church gets older, as it moves away from the beginning, which was all Jews, as the Gentiles become in, then there's more and more Gentiles as you go along. So, I mean, church was fully Jewish at the beginning. And then as time went on, as the Gentiles began to get, as the Gentiles were grafted in, they became the dominant ethnicity. Or there's millions of ethnicities within Gentile, but there was not as many ethnic Jews in the church. So per capita, there's more Gentiles. But as Paul says, these three men, Aristarchus, Mark, and Jesus, called Justus, were a comfort to him. They would have been acquainted with his upbringing. They shared that common Jewish heritage, and so just that alone would have been a comfort to him. Familiarity with him, since now he's living pretty much in the Gentile world completely. And so that would have been a comfort to him. Kind of a taste of home, right? And next he will mention his Gentile companions. So it starts with Epaphras, which makes sense because we talked about him back when we started the letter. The Colossians had learned the gospel from him, and he was a beloved fellow servant and faithful minister, just like Tychicus. So he prayed for the church and shared with Paul their conversions and their love for the church. He struggled in the prayer for his home church and for the neighboring churches in Laodicea and Hierapolis. He prayed for their maturity and that they would be fully assured in all the will of God. In other words, that they would do what God commanded them. See, he was praying that they would obey Christ, that they would live holy lives. That's what he was praying for. And so you think it's just like, this prayer that they would become saved. Well, no, he was praying for that. He knew a lot of them had been saved, but he's also praying that they would now, since they were saved, do good works, that they would live that holy life, that they would follow Christ. And so that's what he's praying for, struggling in prayer for these people. What a great man. Epaphras, put that name into your names of the Bible that you need to remember, a man named Epaphras. What a great man for that area. I mean, it would be great to have someone that was like that. You don't always have the apostles, but you have some local guy named Epaphras that was there for you, just like an apostle, What a great minister. And then there's Luke. He is called the beloved physician. This is the man who wrote the Gospel of Luke and Acts of the Apostles. He recorded his time with Paul, mentioning himself in the historical record, where it says, we, in Acts, we know that Luke was there for those events. In Paul's last imprisonment, he writes to Timothy that only Luke was with him. It is possible, though not certain, that Luke might have first met Paul in Phrygia and Galatia, where Paul had fallen ill. So maybe some people speculate, and it does fit. It doesn't say specifically, so this is kind of legend, but that Paul met Luke because he had gotten sick. And so then Luke came and ministered to him and then was saved. And then decided, I'm going to be your physician. I'll travel with you wherever you go. I'll be there as one of your fellow workers. And so he ministered to him in multiple ways, which is great. He's using what he was trained to do as a young man, using his skills that were not specifically, quote unquote, church related, but still used it for the church. That's exactly what we need to do. Use those gifts and talents, whatever they are. If you're a plumber or electrician, or if you are just a laborer, you can use all that kind of stuff for the glory of God and be very important. And then he used his ability to write as a physician, as a learned Gentile, to write, scripture, which is amazing to think about. But there you go, and he was a trusted friend and confidant of Paul. So there you go. Next comes Demas. Unfortunately, he is probably another name that you're familiar with, but not for good reasons. Demas was a fellow worker with Paul and traveled about with him. But in 2 Timothy 4:10, which is later on, Demas deserted Paul. The reason, according to Paul, was that Demas was in love with this present world. Some scholars note that Demas does not have any positive descriptions attached to his name, unlike the rest of the people. There's nothing positive to mention. Whenever Demas is mentioned, it's not positive. He's a co-worker, but he's just there. And does that matter? Maybe not. I mean, we're arguing from silence here. But it could suggest that Paul already had some reservations concerning this man. He didn't, accept this guy. This guy's awesome. He's not talking about that kind of stuff. It's just, there's Demas. And so, either way, he deserted Paul and has no record of restoration, unlike Mark does. So, we can't say too much more about Demas. That's what happened. He was in love with this present world. We cannot be in love with this present world and continue on, where it will fail. So we need to give up this present world. That brings us to Laodicea and Nympha. Now, as I stated before, Laodicea was the major city near Colossae, which was much smaller at the time. So it makes sense that greetings should be given to them as well. I mean, that's where most of the people are at. Paul wants this letter to be read at the churches in both cities, and the letter that the Laodicean church was to be read at Colossae. Now, what is the letter that the church in Laodicea had? Nobody knows. There's two main theories. The two main theories are that the letter was either lost, and we don't have it anymore, or it is the book of Ephesians. And there's lots of reasons for that, which I won't go into right now. But it could be either one. Those are good answers. We didn't need the letter. Could have been, very much like the Colossae and Ephesian letter, which are all kind of in the same area of the world. But Paul singles out a person named Nymphos, who had been identified as, it's either a woman or a man, we don't know, due to textual variations. So within the copies of the letter to Colossae, we have both male and female. So no one really knows. We don't know if this was a guy or a woman. It depends on if there's the S on the end or an A. So is it male or female? And then there's textual things. So which one is it? I don't know. Anyway, but that doesn't really, it probably matters to the person. But they sorted it out when they get to heaven. But regardless of whether it's a male or female, the person is singled out from the people of Laodicea because of the church which is in their house. This could mean that the church gathered at their house for worship, or that the church was made up of their relatives and of them and their close relations, their friends. Either way, Paul sends specific greetings to the follower of Christ. The person in Laodicea would have known who there was. People in Colossae knew who Nympha or Nymphos was. So that's what important, that he was singling this person out, saying, hey, they have a church in their home, whether their family members were all Christians, and that's the church in their home, or whether they actually had physically, people from the community come in and meet their home, because this person might have been rich and they had the room in their home to have multiple people. So don't know. But it's great to be singled out by the apostle and to be mentioned. Finally, we get to Archippus here. Archippus, Paul says, was a fellow soldier in Philemon 1:2 and was probably a Colossian. The church was supposed to tell him, see that you fulfill the ministry that you have received in the Lord. This is probably not a command because he is failing, but this is an encouragement to keep going. Make sure you keep going, fulfill that ministry, keep on going. So it's not so much like, hey, you failed, you suck, you need to get this done. It's like you need to keep going. Don't give up. Finish well. Good and faithful servant. Keep on going. So this is an encouragement to Archippus. Now Archippus is mentioned in Philemon as well. And there's some debate on who Archippus was. Was he the son of Philemon? We don't know, but so Archippus, but he's a fellow soldier. He's a fighter. He's in there working for the Lord, and he needs to keep on going to fulfill that ministry that God has given him. It's kind of like what he says to Timothy. Just keep going. Don't give up. Don't let people put you down. Don't let them, hold you back. Just keep on going. Fulfill the ministry that you've been given, to Timothy. He reminded them, when you became a Christian, or when you received this ministry, you remember, from the laying of hands of the elders, keep on going. Keep on doing what you need to do. So, that is the study for today. Come back next time. We'll look at verse 18.